Hi, this is Cynthia from Kiwi Urban Homestead. This year I'm going to be experimenting with growing potatoes in drums. These are cut down drums taken from 200 litre plastic drums off local dairy farms that I've cut in half. And I'm going to be growing 5 different varieties of potatoes and trying out a few little variations in how I do each one to find out which ones grow best and produce the best results. As you can see with these drums, some are the top half of the drum and some are the bottom half of the drum. So some have holes already in the bottom, but the way those holes are, where the caps have been on the drums, makes them kind of raised. So there's a bit of a bowl underneath which would collect water. So I'll have to add extra drainage holes. So the first thing today is going to be to drill some holes around these drums. I've contemplated different ways of doing it. Rather than just putting drainage holes in the very bottom, I'm intending to put some holes around the sides of the drums so they will hold just a wee bit of water pooled in the bottom. Might help stop them drying out quite so fast. Okay, after experimenting with a hole saw, decided it was too much hassle, and so I'm just using a 10mm drill bit, and I've drilled holes around the side of the drum. You can see those. And I'm also drilled some holes just in around the side of the plug hole here, so they're a little bit lower than this level. And I've put the hose in here just to see how much water this retains. I don't know if you can see that, but there's just a small amount of water pooled in the bottom of here. Not a great deal, but it should be enough just to help possibly retain a little bit of moisture when the potatoes are growing in these drums. So I'm reasonably happy with that. Now I'm going to spread a trailer cover down before I drill any more, just so it will catch all the little bits of plastic flying off the drill and make it easier to clean up afterwards. Okay, so this is one that doesn't have the big plug holes in the bottom. I've drilled holes around the side of it and put the hose in it, and it retains a wee bit more water. Not too much. I think I'm happy with that. I'll have to think on it. This is the location where I'm going to put these barrels of potatoes. I've drilled holes in the bottom of all of them now. Along this area, and this over here on the front lawn, last year we piled sawdust mixed with horse manure, and it's rotted down really well. I grew pumpkins here last year. We now got some piles of old sheep manure we're going to dig in here, and I'm going to be planting corn here this year. Where the barrels are just sitting at the moment, I've gone along and cleared out any weeds that were underneath them. And to the left will be a pathway, so when I set these up properly I will be putting some cardboard down along there and some bark for the pathway to mulch it. These tractor tyres are going to get moved over a bit and sort of redone so that they won't have any weeds between them and underneath them. So tomorrow I'm going to dig out the ground just underneath these barrels and sit them all in the ground just down a couple of inches, so the bottom of the barrels are surrounded by the sawdust, and that will help keep the bottom cool, help and keep a bit more moisture at the bottom. Perhaps the roots of the plants will also go out through some of those drainage holes and gain a little bit of extra water and nutrient from what's underneath them. So tomorrow's job is going to be digging out a bit of a trench, setting all these barrels in them, and then just gently burying the bottom of the barrels by a couple of inches. And then it will be time to start filling them. I'm getting ready to fill up the barrels that I'll be growing the potatoes in, and I thought I'd show you what I'm putting in them. I started by putting a couple of inches, about 3 or 4 inches, of compost in the bottom of each one. This is the compost which I bought in bags on special. It's just easier for this particular purpose to handle the bags than a big trailer load. I'll be using some aged sheep manure. This has come from a friend's farm from under the wool shed, and it's good and old. You don't ever want to use fresh manure on with potatoes, as it causes potato scab. I'll be using some lawn clippings, about half a bucket in each barrel, to add some extra nitrogen. I'll be using some milk powder and crushed dried eggshells. This is for calcium. Potatoes just won't grow if they don't have a good supply of calcium. So the whole milk powder should give a fairly readily available supply, and the dried and crushed eggshells will be a bit slower release. Drying the eggshells before crushing them helps to break down the membrane that coats the inside of the shells that otherwise prevents the bacteria from actually breaking down the eggshell and releasing the calcium. I'll be using some sulphate of potash for the potassium, and about a tablespoon and a half to each barrel, and some rock solid. This is rock dust for all the trace minerals that it contains. I'll be using about half a cup for each barrel. I'll also be using Vermicast, which I will show you in a moment, and also one extra ingredient which I'll show you shortly. This is one of my worm farms, just made with a couple of stacking containers. The bottom one catches liquid, the top one has the worms and everything they're eating in it. A couple of days ago I scraped all the remaining good stuff off this end and moved it to that end, all the food for them, added a bit of fresh manure and peelings at this end, and covered just this end up with cardboard and carpet. So what will have happened is most of the worms will have migrated down to that end where there's fresh food and darkness, and away from this end. So now, there's still some worms in here, now we should be able to harvest some of the Vermicast from this end to use in the potato bins. So I'm going to go ahead and dig some of that out. You might be wondering why I've chosen these particular ingredients, and so I just thought I'd talk about that for just a moment. Basically, I don't have a lot of money, so I'm looking for what will supply the potatoes' growing needs and not cost me a lot, which is why I've used free barrels from the local dairy farm, compost that was on special, free sheep manure, eggshells, which cost me nothing because we keep chickens, and so they're just a byproduct. The milk powder, I actually brought the cheapest one available to use with my tomatoes, because a lot of people tell me tomatoes do really well when you use milk powder underneath them. And I thought, well, potatoes are related to tomatoes, so what works for one will probably work for the other. So I did a little bit of looking, and sure enough, potatoes really do need some calcium. The sulfate of potash, I don't use superphosphate, is very inexpensive. It's only $7.98 for 1.5 kilos, and you only use a small amount. Rock solid is much cheaper to buy in a bulk bag than it is to buy in a small bottle. You can buy about a kilo of it from the local farm centre for about $13, and I can't remember the exact price of this larger bag, but it works out much cheaper. The Vermicast, of course, I produce myself, and the other ingredient I haven't shown you yet is also a free byproduct, and so that's why I've chosen these things, as well as for the individual nutrients that they will add to the growing mix. Well, apparently the get all the worms to go to one end trick didn't work so well, because as you can see, this Vermicast is still writhing and teeming with worms, so I'm going to have to separate them out the old-fashioned way. Okay, separating worms from the Vermicast the old-fashioned way. I've got a glass table here with some clear plastic lids on it, lined with some wet newspaper, otherwise it wouldn't seem very light at the bottom, and I'm going to spread Vermicast out in a row along each side of these lids. And then I will leave it for a little while in the sunshine, and what will happen is the worms, getting away from the light, will go down deeper and deeper into the Vermicast, and I should be able to scrape some worm-free Vermicast off the top of the pile. And I'll just need to repeat that a few times until I've got the Vermicast I want and the worms down the bottom, which I can put back into the worm farm. So I'm just going to go ahead and lay all of this out and then leave it for a little while in the sun. This time it's only been a few minutes really since I spread this out a bit more and left it, but the worms have already moved down a bit, so I'm going to just take off some more of this Vermicast because I'm wanting to get these drums set up. A few too many worms in that one. Just while I'm doing this, I realise I hadn't actually said how much milk powder and how much eggshells and how much manure I'm adding to each drum. I'm using 3/4 of a cup of milk powder, the rather unscientific 1 good handful of eggshells to each drum, and a shovelful of manure to each drum. With the Vermicast I'll use pretty much whatever's available. I'll just divide it between the 10 drums. Looking at what's in my bucket so far, I might have about 5 litres of it, so maybe a couple of cups of Vermicast into each drum, which is not an awful lot, but it's better than nothing. I'm just going to stop the camera and keep doing this for a moment. So I've got my bucket full of Vermicast ready to be added to the gardens, to the drums, and that extra ingredient I told you about. Commonly, one is advised to plant potatoes with blood and bone fertiliser, as it adds a lot of nitrogen and other nutrients that the potatoes need. I don't use blood and bone because it's made from offal and bone, etc., of animals that are slaughtered here in New Zealand, and unfortunately, because of the superphosphate that's been dumped on our soils are very high in cadmium, which is a nasty heavy metal. So the blood and bone products are likely to contain quite high amounts of cadmium, therefore I don't buy it or use it on my gardens. However, we do keep our own sheep, and we don't use superphosphate. We do keep our own sheep for wool, for meat and for manure, and last weekend we slaughtered 3 of them, and I had the kids who were doing the butchering catch a little bit of the blood from them, and so I've actually got a bucket with some sheep blood in it, which I'm going to dilute with water and then just pour some into each drum for that added blood fertiliser. And I've never done this before, but I think that it might be quite beneficial. So what I'm going to do is I've sprinkled all the different ingredients into the drums. So now I'm just going to give them a good stir, then add the Vermicast and give it a gentle stir so that if there's any worms in there still I won't injure them, and then water in a little bit of the blood fertiliser, and then I'm going to leave this to sort of sit overnight before I plant the potatoes tomorrow. Okay, I've added the Vermicast and the blood, and I have watered the barrels quite thoroughly, and then I added about 1 inch of just plain compost on top of everything else. I always feel like when you put a lot of good stuff into a growing medium and then you plant something, it's often better if the roots can get established and so on before they start going right down into all that good stuff. As you can see, I've also put bird netting over the barrels. This is because of the blood that I've added. I have one dog who's adept at seeking out and digging up everything from that's buried in the soil, so I'm not sure if she'll go for these or not, but I thought I'd put bird netting over them overnight to stop her digging them all up. But I have deliberately left one uncovered at the end so that if she is going to get into them, it'll probably be that one, and I'll know that she is, so I'll know whether I need to continue to protect them for a while after I plant the potatoes. Okay, so these are all ready for tomorrow's potato planting, and I will do a separate video perhaps on that. We'll continue this one. See you soon.